What's going on, everybody? I'm Max Ralph,
Seth Engle.
back with another Collegian Football Podcast. Got some news this week. James Franklin spoke to the media in the summer on Wednesday for the first time since the blue-white game and the end of spring practice. And things got a little exciting, actually. Usually these midweek media avails are hit or miss, but James was a little fired up about some NIL talk going on. Earlier last week, there were some reports that Ryan Day at Ohio State said he was going to need $13 million to keep his roster intact moving forward. And somebody asked James Franklin if he had a number. He did. And he said, it's more than the other ones. And Seth, what was your initial reaction to just that whole kind of thing?
Well, it's always funny when Franklin kind of goes on a tangent and he gets super passionate whenever it's being asked. Because they were asking Franklin, they were like, well, this is huge. So is that correct? That's pretty much what the question, how it was phrased. And he's like, well, yeah, it's huge. But it's all about the market value. And the market right now is, I'm guessing it's a $13 million base. Franklin wants more. Because you have to keep in mind, all these five-star recruits that come in the future, they're not going to be recruited the same way that they're recruited the past few years.
No.
There has to be a way to separate them from other schools, such as USC and maybe schools in the South that, maybe look super prosperous for football. The Big Ten may get a little behind in terms of that. Somewhere that's really sunny and warm. Maybe a place that's in the SEC too. I feel like you're going to have a huge advantage if these Big Ten schools like Penn State and Ohio State don't get that much money,
Yeah. And the interesting part about it is Franklin kept going on. Nobody specifically referenced Ohio State, or James didn't. He kept saying school X. If school X raises this much money, why wouldn't we need this much money? And it's an arms race. We talked about it when Chima Okoli joined our pod a couple months ago. It's like, if some school is going to do it, obviously Penn State's going to do it too. That's just that's where this goes. James Franklin said, if you're going to sell your house, who determines how much it sells for? It's not you. It's not the buyer. It's the market. And if the market is $13 million for Penn State's biggest competition, Penn State needs that. Now, the next step is getting that money. I mean, it's weird to think about it this way, but college football is kind of in the hands of fans at this point. Penn State's had a few NIL collectives popping up lately. Sean Clifford's got his thing with Limitless, but there's the other one that's Success with Honor, asking for donations from alumni or just regular fans. And that's kind of where this thing's going. It's a little bit weird to think that fans can have so much control over the future of their team, but that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. And it's another thing too with Penn State. When you think about the history of the school, it's really a school that's prided itself on purity and tradition, and not becoming a school like Ohio State that's been all glitz and glamour and all about the revenue and the money. It's pretty much been about football for the past 100 years. Now we're starting to see people, you're going to have to be okay with Penn State being a school like Ohio State, or a money grabber, like Miami, just to be able to keep your program afloat. And that's something I've seen fans get behind more and more as this stuff has gone along. And as we learn more about NIL, is you have to be for it. There's really no way to argue it right now. If you're a fan, it's the way the game is going to be right now. We're going to see some crazy changes in the next few years. There are going to be schools that put in a bunch of time and effort into building those NIL collectives.
Yeah.
And schools that have these boosters that are going to put in all the time and effort, just as much as a university would. And then there are going to be schools that don't do that. And those schools are going to get left in the dirt. And that's just what's going to happen in college football over the next few years.
Yeah. Also, it kind of makes me think of another point. I saw some interesting discourse on Twitter yesterday or 2 days ago. Shout out. I think it was Ben Jones had a big long thread. People were talking about how Penn State isn't really adopted by either of the big cities in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. And so it's a situation where you maybe in 5-10 years, you could see the likes of a Pitt who is, in that prime location, downtown Pittsburgh, get more media coverage and more, just more recognition when it comes to this NIL stuff. So I think the onus is really on Penn State right now to put itself in the right spot. And, we saw pretty big-ish from Fanatics that they're going to do Topps trading cards for college athletes. It's like the first time that that's able to happen. Shameless plug, go check out our Collegian stuff. But Penn State was one of the programs named in that release that was like an exclusive list. And I think that's a good sign that Penn State's name is still among, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the USCs, the Texases, whatever. That's good. Like Penn State's there right now. But I agree. I think if Penn State doesn't commit fully to this, and especially the Penn State fan base doesn't commit fully to this, they could get left behind real quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I can guarantee you James Franklin's fully behind it right now. It's a sinking ship at every university, and James Franklin does not want his ship to sink.
Right.
So I think they're going to get behind it. It's really up to the fans right now.
Yeah. Now shift a little bit over to actually the on-field stuff. Penn State's transfers are all here. We've talked a little bit about it in the past already. Talked when he committed, but Damian Chop Robinson, defensive end transfer in from Maryland, is officially on campus. We talked about Hunter Norzad last week, but Chop is as big of an addition as Penn State has had in recent years. And the defensive line room was one that played well last year when we didn't really know what we were going to get from them. And this year we're kind of moving in the same direction. We're not 100% sure what we're going to get from the defensive line outside of PJ Mustipher. And so adding Chop Robinson is huge. Seth, how does he fit in?
Yeah, I first want to start off with, I loved it when they sent out the email that was like, okay, it's official, but they took out Damian completely from his name. It's Chop Robinson. I love that. That is just a great football name. But anyway, so talking about next year, I think Penn State's defensive end room is looking very strong as we move into the fall. Adisa Isaac was getting crazy comparisons after he was out all last year. Apparently had a great spring.
Yep.
He's doing really well. I mean, he's going to start week 1, unless anything else happens. But, they're talking about him like he was the best player on the defense.
Mm-hmm.
And then
that's a defense that has Jair Brown.
Exactly. And then he put Chop Robinson on the other side, and it's like, okay, all of a sudden Penn State may have one of the best, defensive end rooms, or at least starting defensive ends in the Big Ten, maybe even in the country. And that's something that I think they really have to do, just because in the Big Ten, I feel like you need to have a strong edge. And that was something I think Ohio State got a little caught behind last year, and maybe why they dipped a little bit. So defensive line is really not that great. And then
at least not
year,
compared to years past. Yeah.
And then this year they're great. They're, they got guys coming up. And I think Penn State, has a comparable defensive end tandem right there with Robinson and Isaac to what Ohio State has, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I said we don't really know what we're getting from the defensive line. Adisa Isaac is somewhat of a wild card because he was out all of last season. But like you said, I mean, just rave reviews from teammates, coaches. And I mean, the frame is there. I mean, it is what it is. You're going to see him in the fall, and I fully expect it's going to be legit. Chop Robinson's interesting because, like, it's kind of the same deal. The frame is there. He played in 13 games at Maryland last year, but only started in 1. Pretty limited action. He's only a sophomore. That's the thing. Like, we've been hyping him up so much. A lot of media has been hyping him up because he was a borderline 5-star, 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He was huge. And so his pickup is really good. We got to see the on-field product still. He's a sophomore. I mean, he hasn't played that much. So I want to temper like saying Penn State has one of the best defensive end rooms to start just because we haven't seen him yet. But I talked to John Scott on Wednesday, and the first names that came out of his mouth when I asked about Chop Robinson were Yetur Gross-Matos, Odafe Owe, Shaka Toney. Like, those are all guys who came through Penn State, and put up big time numbers and at defensive end and are now off making money in the NFL. And when you've got a defensive line coach who's saying that about you before you haven't even put on pads at Penn State yet, that's pretty good company.
Yeah. I mean, and you say like he had limited time at Maryland, 13 games, only 1 start. But at the same time, how many true freshmen are playing, more than that? There are a few, but it's not many. And he played strongly in the games that he did play. He was a midseason All-American.
Right.
Freshman All-American. So, I mean, the hype could be real. I think even James Franklin, hasn't seen too much of him. He's had tests so far, but apparently he tested pretty well.
Yeah.
Really like his build. He's versatile, moving back to outside linebacker. Very similar build to Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
Something we talked about a lot. Very similar build. But it's almost flip-flopped because Micah Parsons was a linebacker turned defensive end. Robinson's kind of a defensive end turned linebacker sometimes. But
yeah, that was another interesting thing is the Penn State staff and James Franklin said on Wednesday that they did have him kind of graded as maybe being a hybrid guy. Franklin mentioned Jesse Luketa, who was obviously did that last year. But Franklin said they want him to be a defensive end right now, moving forward and learning in Manny Diaz's defense. And I think that's probably good for him in his first year here, just to learn that role and see where it goes. And if he excels in it and shows that athleticism, he can do it in year 2. He's got plenty of time. Like we said, he's only a sophomore. He's got plenty of eligibility left. But so he's going to be a full-time defensive end moving forward. The interesting thing with bringing a guy like that in is, and John Scott was asked about it, is how it affects the guys who are already in that room, the guys who Penn State recruited and signed before adding in the transfer portal. And John Scott said, I mean, straight up, like, I'm honest with them. I wouldn't go out and sign a guy if I wasn't going to tell them. They know they want to be at Penn State to compete. So we're looking at guys like Nick Tarbert and Smith Vilbert. Would have been Zariah Fisher, but he'll be down for the season now. And so I think this room is going to be deeper than we thought at the start of the season. Losing Luketa, losing all the guys that they lost last year. It's different now because you add in Chop Robinson. You've got a Tarburton, you've got an Isaac, you've got a Robinson, you've got a Smith Vilbert. They're in pretty good shape.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
That's it for us. Thanks for watching. I'm Max Ralph, Seth Engle. Keep following along with us at collegian.psu.edu and on Twitter at PSU Football.